Karen invaded my land, calling it a campsite. I flushed the whole place out. I was born on that farm. My earliest memories are of waking up to the sound of roosters, running barefoot through the dewy grass, and following my dad as he mended fences or worked on the old irrigation pump. The very ground felt alive beneath my feet. My grandfather carved these fields out of wildland after World War I, moving stones by hand to build the walls that still stand. To outsiders, it might just seem like a few acres of green fields and a weathered red barn. But to me, every single inch of it is a part of my family's story. Life on the farm wasn't glamorous, but it was reliable. Cows to milk, chickens to feed, hay to cut, day after day. And there's a certain dignity in that routine. The sweat on your brow feels different when it soaks into land that is your own earned, cared for, and inherited. The farm was my refuge. My father used to say, "A man's land is like his skin. When someone trespasses, you feel it in your bones." He wasn't wrong. The unwanted guests so. You can imagine my anger when the Homeowners Association HOA, an organization meant to safeguard property values, started encroaching year after year. Initially, it was subtle. They paved a road a little too far past the designated limit. They put up a sign advertising community walking trails right at the edge of my fence line. I overlooked it, thinking it might just be a mistake in planning. After all, who in their right mind would think a farm belonged to a suburban group? Then came Karen. You've probably heard me mention her before. Blonde hair, pastel sweaters, and a voice that could strip paint off a barn door. She became HOA president, not because she was intelligent or kind, but because she was loud enough to make everyone else back down. If there was one thing Karen loved more than overseeing her own yard, it was overseeing everyone else's. She started showing up at the edge of my property, a clipboard in her hand, muttering about underutilized land. To her, the fact that I hadn't built tennis courts or elaborate gazebos meant my farm was being wasted. She once said to me, completely serious, "Think of the property value increase if this could be a recreational zone." I laughed in her face, assuming it was a bad joke, but she wasn't joking. The whole neighborhood was located just beyond my southern fence line, perfectly uniform houses, trimmed lawns, neighbors whispering gossip over hedges, the whole Stepford deal. To them, my wide open pastures were an eyesore, a blank slate just begging for community projects. But to me, they were the last bit of peace in a world drowning in conformity. My initial approach was straightforward: live and let live. I didn't bother them about their tacky garden gnomes or their obsession with leaf blowers at 7 in the morning. In return, I expected them to leave me and my land alone. That's how neighbors are supposed to act, right? Respect each other's boundaries. But Karen wasn't like that. Respect wasn't in her vocabulary. To her, boundaries were merely suggestions. She thrived on testing people's patience until they either gave in or broke. And when she realized I wasn't giving in, she decided to try and break me. I will never forget the first day I noticed campers on my field. I came out with a mug of coffee in hand, ready to do my morning work, and froze. There, right in the center of my pasture, was a bright green tent with a family of 4 cooking hot dogs on a portable grill. I thought maybe they had gotten lost or were confused about the county park being 2 miles down the road. But when I asked what they were doing, they just smiled and said, "Karen told us this was the new community campsite." Community campsite. The words burned into my ears like acid. I drove straight to Karen's house that afternoon, ready to demand an explanation. She greeted me at the door with that self-satisfied smile, sipping sparkling water like a queen holding court. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, waving her perfectly manicured hand. "It's just a bit of camping. The neighborhood doesn't have space, and your farm is perfect. You should be honored." Honored, as if it was a privilege to have strangers trample my fields, leave behind trash, and light fires just yards away from my hay barn. I told her flat out it wasn't going to happen. My land was private. Period. But she leaned in, her eyes shining, and whispered, "You can't stop progress. The HOA has made its decision." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with nosy neighbors. I was dealing with a full-blown land grab disguised as community spirit. Over the next few weeks, the invasion expanded. More tents appeared, cars parked haphazardly, crushing crops I had spent months nurturing. Kids chased my chickens like it was some kind of petting zoo, while adults threw beer cans in the ditch. Every morning I woke up to new damage, new footprints, new disrespect for the land my family had worked and sacrificed for. And every time I complained, the campers repeated the same excuse. Karen said, "It's fine," and there she was, always walking around with her clipboard, giving orders about where tents should go, as if she owned the place. To the campers, she looked like a leader. To me, she looked like a parasite draining the life out of everything she touched. I tried to stay calm. I tried to remind myself that reasonable people eventually see sense, but deep down, I knew Karen wasn't reasonable. She was greedy, manipulative, and shameless, and I could already feel something in me snapping, because on that farm, I wasn't just a homeowner, I was a guardian, and Karen had just declared war on my sanctuary. The unveiling. If you think the sight of strangers camping on my land was bad, wait until you hear how this entire fiasco was officially introduced. You see, Karen didn't just come up with the idea and hope for the best. No, she had a whole performance planned, a classic HOA ambush during one of their monthly meetings. Unlike every plan she concocted, it was wrapped in cheerful colors, fake smiles, and a thick layer of self-righteousness. I still remember walking into that meeting. I wasn't an HOA member, thankfully, but since my farm bordered their subdivision, I made it my business to attend once in a while just to keep an eye on what they were plotting. Typically, it was boring stuff: disagreements about mailbox heights, complaints about yard decorations, votes on pool maintenance, the usual HOA material. But that night, the atmosphere felt different. Karen was practically glowing with self-congratulatory excitement, pacing in front of the board like a teacher about to unveil the year's biggest project. She tapped her clipboard against the podium and cleared her throat dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "our community has flourished because of shared values. But one thing we've been missing is shared experiences." She paused, letting her words hang in the air as if she were proposing a cure for cancer. "I propose the establishment of a community campsite, a place where families can bond with nature, where children can learn about the outdoors, and where we, as neighbors, can grow even closer together." A round of applause erupted. I swear, applause. I nearly choked on the stale cookie I'd grabbed from the snack table. My jaw tightened when I realized the board members, the very people who were supposed to oversee finances and property boundaries, were nodding along as if Karen had just reinvented the wheel. Then came the punchline. Karen turned, pointed her pen directly at a map of the neighborhood pinned to the wall, and drew a bright red circle over my farm. "And the perfect location," she declared, "is right here." Every eye in the room turned to me. I raised my hand. "Excuse me, that's my land, my private farm. You can't just..." Karen cut me off with a sharp laugh. "Oh, don't be so possessive. Property lines are flexible. And besides, your land is practically not being used. You don't host events. You don't build facilities. You don't even let kids run around. Why should all that space sit empty while our community is lacking recreational areas?" Her voice was dripping with fake sympathy, as if she was scolding a selfish child. I wanted to yell, because it's mine. That's why. But I held my tongue, waiting to see how far this absurdity would go. Karen flipped through a stack of papers and waved them proudly. "We've already conducted surveys. Families are desperate for a safe, fun, local option for camping. Think of the children. Think of the property values. A campsite will make this neighborhood the envy of the entire county." The crowd murmured in agreement. A few parents clapped harder, imagining s'mores and campfire songs. One man even whispered, "That would save us money on vacations." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not one person was questioning whether they had the right to use my farm. They were only asking how quickly they could set up their tents. I stood up, slammed my hand on the table, and said, "You can't just take my land because you're too cheap to book a campground. This farm has been in my family for generations. It's not for sale, not for rent, and certainly not for a bunch of hoe busybodies with a marshmallow addiction. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen narrowed her eyes. Now, no need for hostility, she purred, though the poison in her tone was obvious. We're not taking your land. We're simply repurposing it. Think of it as doing your civic duty. Don't you want to give back to the community? Give back. They hadn't given me a single thing, unless you count headaches and trespassers. Karen's allies spoke up next. One board member, a guy whose lawn Karen once praised in the newsletter, nodded energetically. It's just a field, isn't it? You hardly use it. Why not let the neighborhood benefit? Another woman chimed in. I mean, what harm could it do? Kids need space to play. What harm could it do? I imagined wildfires from untended campfires, trash covering my fields, livestock scared by shouting kids, and worst of all, the erosion of my family's heritage. But these people weren't thinking about consequences. They were mesmerized by Karen's sales pitch, too scared or too lazy to question her. And then Karen delivered the line that made my blood boil. If he refuses, we'll just classify it as community property. After all, isn't the spirit of the hoe to share and uplift everyone? It's not like one man should be able to hoard all that land when so many could enjoy it. Hoard, that was the word she used, as if working from dawn to dusk to maintain fences, feed animals, and keep weeds at bay was some form of selfishness. As if my sweat and my family's sacrifice were nothing but obstacles in her pursuit of hoe glory. I left that meeting with my fists clenched so tight my knuckles ached. The sound of applause still echoed in my ears, each clap a nail in the coffin of reason. They didn't see me as a neighbor anymore. To them, I was just a stubborn old farmer standing in the way of their fun. That was when I realized Karen wasn't just testing boundaries. She was rewriting them. And if I didn't fight back hard, I was about to lose everything my family had built. The beginning of the end, the very next day. The campsite invasion became a reality. Flyers appeared in mailboxes announcing the grand opening of the Hoe family campgrounds. Families strolled onto my fields with picnic baskets, coolers, and inflatable mattresses. Karen walked around like a park ranger, waving her clipboard and assigning tent spaces. And all the while, she kept smiling at me, as if daring me to stop her. Well, I didn't stop her that day. Not yet. Because while she was busy planning her campsite, I was planning something else entirely. Something she wouldn't see coming until it was too late. The day after Karen's little presentation, my farm went from a sanctuary to a circus. I woke up early as always, expecting to tend to the animals and fix a section of fence I'd been meaning to repair. Instead, I opened the door and found a caravan of SUVs parked haphazardly along my gravel driveway. Beyond them, in my pasture, brightly colored tents were growing like weeds after a spring rain. At first, I thought maybe I was dreaming. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and took another sip of coffee. But no, the sight didn't change. Families were hammering stakes into the soil. Kids were chasing each other with water guns, trampling down my carefully cut hay. One man was unloading a full-sized gas grill from the back of his truck. If my land had miraculously turned into a public campground overnight. The smell of lighter fluid reached me before I even stepped off my porch. Someone had already started a fire pit using scrap wood they'd found near my barn. Sparks flew dangerously close to the dry grass, and my heart skipped a beat, thinking about how easily the whole field could catch fire. I stormed across the yard shouting, "What in the world do you people think you're doing?" A woman in yoga pants and a sun visor smiled at me if I had just asked about the weather. "Oh, hi," she said. Karen said it's fine. We're setting up for the first official Hoe family campout. Isn't this wonderful? Wonderful. My voice cracked. You're trespassing on private property. This isn't a campsite. It's my farm. She shrugged, completely unfazed. Karen told us it was community land now. She even assigned us our spots. You're welcome to join the barbecue later. Join the barbecue on my own pasture. I swear my blood pressure went up by 20 points right then. By noon, the invasion had grown. Cars lined the road, blocking my access to the equipment shed. Teenagers played loud music from a portable speaker, the bass thumping through my barn walls. The boys thought it would be funny to chase my chickens, sending feathers flying, and when I asked one man to move his car off my alfalfa field, he smirked and said, "Relax, dude. Karen cleared it. Karen cleared it." As if her permission suddenly cancelled out property deeds and family legacies, I finally spotted her around mid-afternoon. She was walking up and down the rows of tents like a camp director, giving orders through a little whistle she must have bought just for the occasion. Clipboard in one hand, iced latte in the other. She looked like she was auditioning for the role of dictator of the outdoors. When she saw me, she didn't even flinch. In fact, she smiled as if we were partners in this chaos. "Isn't it beautiful?" she cooed, waving her hand at the mess. Families, bonding, children, laughing, property values soaring. It's everything I dreamed. I clenched my fists. It's everything I feared. This is private property, Karen. You can't just turn it into your personal campground. She tilted her head, pretending to be innocent. Private property is such an outdated concept. We're a community. And besides, you weren't using this land. It's practically wasted. Wasted, I nearly shouted. This land feeds my animals, grows my crops, and keeps a roof over my head. It's not wasted. It's mine. But Karen wasn't listening. She blew her whistle at a group of kids climbing my fence and shouted, "Careful with the farmer's toys, sweeties." Then she turned back to me and said, "Try to relax. You might even enjoy it if you stop being so selfish." Selfish, that word hit me harder than the rest. According to Karen, standing up for my rights wasn't just inconvenient, it was immoral. She had twisted the narrative so completely that I was now the villain for not letting her neighbors run wild on my land. The campers weren't innocent either. They laughed when I argued with Karen. Some even rolled their eyes, muttering about grumpy old farmers who couldn't share. It was like watching reality warp in real time. The damage piled up quickly. By evening, the ground was littered with plastic cups, candy wrappers, and beer cans. Someone dumped greasy dishwater into my irrigation ditch. A tent stake punctured the hose I used for watering livestock. And when I went to check the barn, I found a couple of kids swinging from the rafters like it was some kind of jungle gym. "Get down from there," I yelled, but they just laughed and ran off. Their parents didn't even apologize. One mother just said, "They're kids. Lighten up." By the time the sun set, I was exhausted, not from farm work, but from policing trespassers on land that should have been safe. The sight of my pasture glowing with campfires, the sound of my animals restless from the noise, the smell of smoke and spilled beer, it all churned in my stomach like poison. That night I sat on my porch in the dark, my fists clenched around a cold cup of coffee. My farm, my sanctuary, had been reduced to a playground for people who didn't care one bit about the sweat and sacrifice that kept it alive. And worst of all, they thought they were entitled to it. Karen had unleashed the first wave of invasion, and I knew deep down it wouldn't stop here. She wasn't the type to back down. No, Karen would push further, demand more until she had complete control. And as I stared out at the flickering fires in my pasture, one thought burned hotter than the embers. If they want a war, they've just started one. The turning point the morning of my confrontation with Karen, I decided I would try one more time to resolve this the right way. As satisfying as it might have been to throw every tent and cooler into the road myself, I knew that could backfire. Karen thrived on drama, and she'd spin the story to make me look like the bad guy. So instead, I picked up the phone and called the sheriff's office. "Mum," I said as calmly as I could manage, "there are dozens of people trespassing on my farm. They've set up tents, built fires, and they're bothering my livestock. I need officers here now." There was a pause, then the dispatcher sighed. "Is this about the hoe again?" "Yes," I snapped. "They've turned my land into some kind of campsite." Another sigh. "We've already received multiple calls about it. Unfortunately, sir, the paperwork they submitted shows some kind of approval for community use. It looks like a civil dispute, not a criminal one. We can't intervene unless someone's in immediate danger." I nearly dropped the phone. Community use? What paperwork? That's my deeded land. I understand your frustration, but you'll need to handle this through the courts. The courts. Weeks, maybe months of red tape, while Karen's campers ran wild on my property every weekend. My blood boiled, but I thanked the dispatcher through gritted teeth and hung up. Fine. If the sheriff wouldn't help, maybe the county office would. I drove down to the courthouse, holding my land deed like a lifeline. The clerk behind the counter, a young man who looked barely out of college, clicked through his computer with all the urgency of a snail. Name, he asked. I gave it. He typed. He frowned. Oh yeah, I see what's going on here. The HOA submitted an application for a temporary community recreation designation on adjacent land. Looks like someone signed off on it. My chest tightened. Adjacent land? That's my land. He shrugged. I don't make the rules, sir. You'll have to file a formal complaint, but keep in mind those processes take time. You might want to hire a lawyer. I leaned over the counter, lowering my voice. Son, do you understand what you're saying? My property has been stolen in broad daylight, and you're telling me to take a number and wait my turn. His eyes darted nervously to the security guard nearby. Please don't raise your voice, sir. I'm just explaining procedure. Procedure. That word tasted bitter on my tongue. Procedure meant nothing while Karen was hosting barbecues on my pasture. Still, I left with a stack of forms I knew would gather dust in some office long before they made a difference. On the drive home, I called a local lawyer I'd worked with once for a property line dispute. He listened politely, then sighed. Honestly, I've dealt with your HOA before. They have a knack for bending rules and filing just enough paperwork to muddy the waters. You'd win eventually, but litigation would cost you thousands and drag on 4 months. Do you really want to spend that much just to prove what's already obvious? Yes, I nearly shouted. It's my land. I get it, he said gently. But in the meantime, the court won't issue an emergency injunction unless you can prove irreparable harm, property damage, livestock injury, something concrete. I hung up without saying goodbye. Irreparable harm. What did they think trampled crops, spooked animals, and burned pastures were? By the time I pulled into my driveway, the campers were already gathering again, getting ready for another night of family fun. Karen was at the gate handing out flyers for the upcoming neighborhood camping festival, as though she'd been elected mayor of my farm. I stormed over and snatched one from her hand. In bold letters, it read, HOA Family Campground Festival. Music, food, fun, all ages, welcome. And below that, location, community pasture, formerly known as the farm. Formerly known as the farm. My stomach twisted. I confronted Karen right there at the gate. This is fraud. You've falsified documents, lied to your neighbors, and stolen land that doesn't belong to you. She smirked. Call it what you want. The HOA board approved it. The county stamped it. And the sheriff won't lift a finger. Face it, you've lost. I glared at her, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. This isn't over. You've crossed a line, Karen, and lines have consequences. She leaned in close, her perfume cloying, her smile poisonous. The only consequence here is that you're irrelevant. This is bigger than you. You can't fight progress. Progress, that's what she called it. Trampling over a man's life's work, desecrating his heritage, and throwing trash across his fields, all in the name of progress. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the flyers spread out before me. My hands shook, not from fear, but from fury. I had tried every channel: the sheriff, the county, the courts, even a lawyer, and they all failed me. The system was designed to protect people like Karen, who knew how to manipulate rules and paperwork. It hit me then. If I wanted justice, I couldn't wait for a courtroom. I would have to deliver it myself. The farm had always provided for me, and now it whispered a solution. Beneath those fields ran an old sewage system my grandfather had installed decades ago. It was meant to handle waste from the barn and farmhouse, pumping it underground into a drainage pond. It was crude, but it worked, and it had the potential to do far more than just handle farm runoff. An idea began to take shape. A plan, a way to turn Karen's smug little campsite into the disaster it deserved to be. The legal system had failed me. The HOA had mocked me. But my farm had one last trick to play, and I was ready to use it. The final showdown, the day Karen organized the so-called neighborhood camping festival, was the day my patience finally broke. From the moment the sun rose, I knew something was wrong. Instead of the usual quiet clucking of my hens and the rustle of wind through the fields, I heard engines rumbling. Not one or two cars, but dozens. By the time I walked to the edge of my driveway, the road was clogged with SUVs, minivans, even a rented U-Haul. They spilled into my pasture like ants onto a picnic, unloading tents, coolers, folding chairs, and inflatable mattresses. By mid-morning, my farm no longer looked like farmland. It looked like the state fair had crashed into a landfill. Bright tarps fluttered in the wind. Someone had set up a bounce house on my alfalfa. A portable stage was being assembled for a local band showcase. According to the flyer, kids ran wild, tearing through my crops as if the rows of corn were just another playground. And presiding over the madness, as always, was Karen. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and a sash across her chest that read Camp Director in glittery letters. A whistle dangled from her neck, which she blew with alarming frequency, barking orders like a general leading her troops. Tents, go over there. Keep the firewood stacked neatly. Remember, folks, this is our community's land now. Treat it with pride. The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't just borrowing my farm, she was erasing me from it. I stood on my porch for a long moment, my hands trembling around my coffee mug. Every instinct screamed at me to march down there, kick every tent pole into the dirt, and drag them out by their ears. But another instinct took over, the one that told me to be patient, to be clever, to use the farm's own legacy against them. I had the ace up my sleeve, the old sewage system, a relic of my grandfather's era, with its crude but effective pump. I knew exactly where the main line ran, right under the middle of the field Karen had designated as her prime campsite, and I knew exactly how to make it overflow. As the afternoon wore on, the festival reached its peak. The band on the makeshift stage started playing, a cacophony of amateur rock that echoed across the fields. The smell of cheap hot dogs and bug spray filled the air, mingling with the scent of trampled grass and smoke. Karen, laughing and toasting a soda, was in her element. She had won, or so she thought. That was my cue. I walked back to my barn, found the lever for the old pump, and pulled it. The motor groaned to life, a deep, earthy rumble that was a familiar comfort to me. Only this time, I let it run in reverse. I felt the vibration through the concrete floor as the pump began to churn, not pulling waste into the drainage pond, but forcing the contents of the overflow pond out and back up through the main line. The first sign was a gurgle, a strange, wet sound that came from the very center of the campsite. Then, a dark, bubbling pool formed at the surface, spreading rapidly. A moment later, the stench hit. It was a foul, overwhelming wave of raw sewage, the accumulated waste of decades of farm life. The campers, in their ignorance, had built their festival directly on top of it. Shrieks erupted from the center of the crowd as the ground turned to a sinking, brown bog. Tents collapsed as their stakes were swallowed by the muck. The band's music cut out in a jarring screech as their equipment shorted out. People, slipping and sliding in the foul tide, scrambled to save their belongings, their idyllic family fun turning into a panicked, disgusting nightmare. Karen, standing proudly on a small hillock, watched in horror as her perfect kingdom dissolved into a sea of filth. The brown tide reached her, soaking her expensive sneakers, and she shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. "What have you done?" she screamed at me. I stood on my porch, a safe distance away, and watched it all. I didn't say a word. The look on her face was all the justice I needed. She had tried to steal my family's legacy, to turn my land into her personal playground, but my land had fought back. She had wanted community spirit, and what she got was a flood of something else entirely. The campers packed up and left in a hurry, their faces pale with disgust. The festival was over. The lawn, formerly known as my farm, would require more than a few days to recover, but so would Karen and her sense of entitlement. The next day, A few of my neighbors came by, not with complaints, but with a quiet understanding in their eyes. The HOA, after the public humiliation, was silent. Karen never came to my fence line again. My land, my sanctuary, was finally mine again. The battle wasn't won in a courtroom, but in the muddy fields of my farm. It was a dirty victory, but it was mine, and it was a promise kept to my father, that I would always protect the land that was like my own skin.